Nature's Archive podcast, a Jumpstart Nature production.
The Joshua Tree is perhaps only rivaled by the saguaro cactus as the icon of the desert Southwest. Featured on U2's classic album cover and now the backdrop of countless Instagram glamour shots, its unique, almost alien look is unmistakable. But for decades, the Joshua Tree was looked at with disdain, even loathing and hatred, believe it or not. Today, our guest is Barret Baumgart, author of the new book, Yuck, The Birth and Death of the Weird and Wondrous Joshua Tree. In this book, Barret explores the Joshua Tree, and you could consider this a part history, part natural history, part cultural criticism, and part ecology book. It's very unique. And today we delve into the strange and winding tale of the Joshua Tree and its history of evading human preconceptions and assumptions. Living on the edge, it faces a potentially bleak future, but perhaps it will thwart us once again against all odds. Be sure to check out Barret on Instagram at Barret Baumgart and on his Substack called Dumpster Fires, and those are both linked in the show notes. So without further delay, Barret Baumgart and Joshua Trees. All right, Barret, thank you so much for joining me this bright and early morning.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here, Michael. Thank you for having me.
And I'm sure this happens to you all the time, but I just wanted to show that this shirt I'm wearing, my kids got it for me. It's, can't quite see
nice.
It. There we go. Joshua Tree. So relevant to the conversation today, I would say.
Well done.
Of course, the main reason why we connected is a book that you have that just came out recently.
March
25th, very recently, about the Joshua Tree. But before we get into the weird and crazy twists and turns of that story, I'm curious how you came to be interested in this subject. And maybe even going back further, have you always had an eye towards nature?
The more I think about it, yeah, I mean, as a child, I grew up on a large canyon in California. I think at night, beyond that fence, there was a lot of activity. Coyotes howling, tarantulas would make it into the yard. Rattlesnakes, that canyon would drop down to, I guess, what is technically the San Diego River, though that sounds kind of like an oxymoron. If you're familiar with a lot of Southern California, there was an old Mission Dam there. The oldest construction project in the Western United States is just quietly hiding down there where the Spanish first arrived. And yeah, I don't know. The canyon, my mom was kind of a crazy lady. We had tons of pets. We had a giant hissing cockroach. We had millipedes, guinea pigs, rabbits, birds, dogs. It was kind of a menagerie. So yeah, early on, fascinated with nature, hiking, having lots of strange pets in the house, handling animals, seeing the life cycle, the mortality, the fragility, the beauty. And I don't know. I never have really thought of myself as someone who just loves nature, but more and more as I keep writing these books and engaging with the natural world, yeah, it started early.
Yeah, I guess maybe that early exposure, it's what you grew up with. It was your baseline. It's what you were used to. So perhaps it's harder to recognize the interest that all instilled into you.
Yeah, I think so.
So then, let's get straight to the Joshua Tree in your book, Yuck. How did you discover this interesting story or set of stories to tell?
I've always been really curious about the Mojave Desert. My first book, China Lake, which is actually named after a military base, kind of quietly hiding out in the Mojave Desert. But my mind has kind of been rooted in this landscape for a while. And I've always been attracted to Joshua Tree. It's obviously been growing steadily in popularity, what kind of the fastest growing national park. And long story short, 2020, I was supposed to get married out there April 2020, was already feeling a little self-conscious. It was kind of cliche. The place was so hip, so many attractive wedding blogs, photographers, just this whole, massive production of this kind of manufactured perfection out there, this Mojave chic aesthetic. It sounds super critical, but yeah, it's quite an industry. And I wanted to come up with something kind of to justify this wedding to myself, and then also to guests who'd be flying, from New York and Connecticut, wondering why the hell they just landed in Los Angeles. And instead of going to the beach, now they got to trek out to this wasteland they'd never heard of 2 hours away. So I was like, let me do a little research dive, do a little digging. I'll come up with something pithy. And that talks about this tree, which isn't a tree that people will know nothing about. Maybe I'll come up with some wedding vows in the process. Long story short, again, I just started finding really interesting material that was surprising me. And that research project continued to expand as the wedding was canceled by COVID. So I kind of It's a strange story. I kind of accidentally started this book without any real plan or design. Went from being hopefully a folded 2-page note to a 120-page book.
Just to give the full title of the book, it's Yuck, The Glorious Grotesque History of the Joshua Tree, Yucca brevifolia. So in the title itself, it gives a hint as to some of the the breadth of the coverage that you give to it. From the Latin name, there's a little bit of ecology in here. There's a lot of history in here. How would you describe the book? Who is the audience? Who were you hoping would pick it up and take it away?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's kind of hard to answer. I mean, broadly, it's a hybrid. It's got history. It's got ecology. There's natural history. It starts with kind of a personal preface. There's cultural criticism. There's biology. I don't know what to call it other than a nonfiction hybrid. And, on the page, it looks strange as well. So it's kind of doing a lot. And when I set out, I didn't really have an audience in mind. I think what usually keeps me moving through a longer piece of writing is if I'm finding things that are surprising me, exciting me, stimulating me intellectually. If I'm hooked, I can assume the reader might be hooked. And so what you end up with, though, potentially is a book that, if someone's diving in, I want to learn about climate change, or I really want to learn about, the intricacies of this plant. They might be disappointed or they might be delighted when the book takes a lot of twists and turns, as you've said, because, we're not hammering in on one specific item here. The book is moving and shifting and, a lot of surprising transitions, hopefully. But my goal is to keep it engaging and surprising.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting, for sure. I didn't know what to expect when I got the review copy, and I did enjoy it. The twists and turns did speak to me. And we'll get into a little bit of that here today. I don't want to give away the whole book, but obviously there's some interesting tidbits that we can talk about. Since this podcast here, a lot of times we do get pretty deep into ecology, into natural history, and the biology. Why don't we just talk a little bit to begin with about what is a Joshua tree?
Yeah, I mean, a Joshua tree, technically it's not a tree. I think a lot of people know that. I don't really hammer that in the book, but yeah, it's been thought, there's a long debate. We do go quickly through. The book doesn't go into the full botanist debate over the years, but there was tons of names, tons of candidates. Eventually a guy named George Engelmann, I think in 1871, won the prize when he decided it was Yucca brevifolia. Another big contender was Yucca draconis, which would have been cool if we had Dragon Tree National Park hiding out there.
I like that.
Yeah, brevifolia, short-leaved yucca, not quite as captivating. Technically, I think, it's a member of the lily family. You might call it a large-leaved monocot. I'm not a biologist, so I don't go too deeply or worry too much about technically what this thing is. But it is a totally fascinating. If you're not in California, if you're not in the West, you've definitely seen a Joshua tree. You've definitely seen a yucca tree. I think the Joshua tree is going to be probably the strangest, most kind of grotesque example of the yucca formation probably in the world. And there's so much more to say about it, but in what direction would you like to go from there?
So we'll get into the strange and grotesque here in a little bit. I'll just have to keep the listeners waiting for a moment. But so just give us a sense of place. Where are Joshua trees found?
Primarily in the Mojave Desert. Eastern California, kind of southern, as we range up northeast toward Las Vegas. We're covering an area from, kind of near Palm Springs, ranging through Death Valley, northward, upward along the eastern Sierra Nevada. There's a huge chunk of desert called the Mojave Desert, and tends to be higher elevation. These Joshua trees kind of exist in sort of a finite ecological window. It's a little bit cooler up there. Joshua Tree is very famous for, the collision of the Colorado Desert and the Mojave. It's interesting to see that there's just absolutely no Joshua trees at those lower elevations. And one of the most exciting things for me, and probably a lot of people who love Joshua trees and visitors to the Mojave, is to, be driving along in a car and come up over a ridge and all of a sudden, whoa, what are these things standing out in mass suddenly that it's like we just crossed some sort of invisible threshold and there they are. Might be dozens or it might be thousands on end. And I think that speaks to kind of the fragile growth of this thing. They just really do exist in a really finite little ecotone right there.
Yeah, and if I recall, I think there's maybe a small stand on the edge of the Sonoran Desert in Arizona as well. But yeah, so there's just this little patch in the southwestern United States. And
Yeah, Mojave, outside the Mojave too. Yeah, that's true. You could find them supposedly in Utah. They are in Arizona.
I didn't know
Nevada.
about Utah. Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've heard that they're technically touching down in Utah soil at some point. So people should research that.
Hey, I did look into this a little bit, and I had forgotten this, but the Joshua tree used to be considered one species. But I don't know, about 15, 20 years ago, there was a movement to split the eastern Joshua tree from the western Joshua tree. So those that we see in Arizona and Utah and parts of Nevada are actually part of the eastern species, which is Yucca yageriana. And to your point about the elevation, I sometimes help out with the local community college. I do a field ecology trip, and part of what we do is we go through the Eastern Sierra down to the Mojave. We do visit a couple of different stands of Joshua trees. And last year in April, it actually snowed while we were standing there amongst the Joshua trees. So these, you're in the desert, you're thinking hot and dry, but no, they can withstand these, kind of frigid, cold, changeable conditions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is one of the most exciting things. And one of the prettiest things I've ever seen is driving through a Joshua tree forest with a couple inches of snow.
Yep.
And yeah, it's amazing.
And in terms of their place in the ecosystem, can you tell me a little bit about what animals might use them, who pollinates them? Do you have any insights that you could share?
Yeah, I mean, the most fascinating thing to touch on initially is the mutualism of the yucca moth Joshua tree relationships. It is one of the most kind of well-known, fascinating, symbiotic, mutual evolutions, I think, like we know about. The Joshua tree for pollination depends exclusively on a tiny moth about the size of your fingernail, comes in the night, lands in the flower, lays an egg. In doing so, pollinates the tree. Tree really cannot reproduce without the presence of this moth. And those eggs, they hatch, they eat through the flowers. That was a super famous relationship. It speaks to, again, the fragility of this tree, all the things surrounding it, threatening it. Behind the scenes, you have this tiny little moth. If that thing goes away, everything's at stake. So we can touch more on that maybe later. But yeah, I mean, shelter for plenty of bird species, lizards, the Joshua tree. In its early stages, you might be walking through the desert. It's extremely fragile. Most of them get picked off by, rodents, mice, rabbits are going to be chewing this little tuft of grass that is the first, sprout of the Joshua tree. And maybe 800 years later, you see one of these behemoths hanging out around the gates of the park.
Yeah, you wouldn't even recognize the Joshua tree when it's new, when it's young. Mm-hmm. It's hard to envision it turning into this massive woody structure that these 800-year-old Joshua trees become.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, it's a tiny sprout. And then, yeah, even when it's a few feet tall, yeah, decades, hundreds of years until you finally see this glorious thing that has become so famous. Yeah.
And how do they propagate? Like, okay, so with this moth, the yucca moth is responsible for them from a life cycle standpoint, but do seeds just drop below or do they get carried elsewhere? Or do you have a sense of how these populations kind of move over time?
It's a good question. Yeah, they drop, they blow, they get dispersed. There's been a big debate about the role of the Shasta ground sloth. It was thought that, back in the day, the Shasta ground sloth was responsible for eating these berries, dispersing the seeds. And the Joshua tree obviously continues to exist without the Shasta ground sloth. But yeah, it's it's what you would expect. Birds, rodents, any scavenger coming through, dispersing seeds, defecating.
Hey, Michael here. Great news. After such a long wait, Jumpstart Nature, my education and conservation organization, is now officially a 501c3 nonprofit. That's as of April 2025. This unlocks a bunch of great opportunities for us. Jumpstart Nature is who produces Nature's Archive and the Jumpstart Nature podcast. I started Jumpstart Nature to inspire you to take action to help nature. There is so much we all can do, even in times like this, where it feels like our institutions are failing us. So please help us continue our mission by donating to us at jumpstartnature.com/donate. A $5 per month donation goes a long way towards producing these shows. You can also support us through Patreon at jumpstartnature.com/Patreon, spelled Patreon. And by the way, for those of you using the Patreon app on an Apple device, please note that Apple adds on an additional fee. So if you use Patreon, you should contribute through their website instead to avoid that fee. And as always, we're looking for volunteers. If you've ever dreamed of meeting some of the guests we have on the show, producing a podcast, or just love editing audio and video, or even if you'd like to help us in our app development, I'd love to hear from you. Drop me a note at hello@jumpstartnature.com. Thank you for your support, and thanks for being part of our movement. So I just want to ask you directly, when you say they're strange and grotesque, like what is it that's coming to your mind that causes you to say that?
It's the anthropomorphic appearance of the tree, the lack of symmetry. These, it's hard for me not to use the kind of wild, outlandish terms, the radical diction that's deployed throughout the book by the Victorian writers that I start off with, sampling in excess. But yeah, these long arthritic arms, they look like monsters in pain. Some of these people say it back in the day. I personally would not start out by saying the Joshua Tree is grotesque. I don't think most people would say that, but what is it that, that defines them? What are we drawn to so much in their appearance? And it is that it's just so irregular. It's alien, strange. We're not thinking of it in negative or monstrous terms so much anymore. But yeah, weird, whatever words we have, they are strange, they are weird, unique, singular, and they've become this iconic symbol of the West, the Mojave Desert, and a kind of an open canvas for a human projection. They've become a mascot. And yeah, we really do have a unique, complex relationship with them at the moment. And, in this book, looking further back, yeah, it's been a long relationship, not always a positive one.
The word that would have come to mind for me that doesn't paint such a picture is just unique. But I think that what you said that really resonates is alien, because you were talking about like coming over a hill in the desert, and generally these hills are going to be pretty barren. There's a lot of dirt visible, maybe some low shrubs, perhaps now, unfortunately, some non-native grasses coming in. But then all of a sudden you have these, how tall can they get? 30 feet? Or so?
They can get really tall. I think, they've been measured to like 60, 80 feet.
Even taller. Yeah. That's huge.
Yeah. Those were cut down. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just suddenly these things appear and they don't look like any other tree. As you said, they aren't technically a tree. Then again, what is a tree anyway? That's still, sort of a judgment call when it comes to botany is, where do you draw the line between a shrub and a tree and other forms of growth? So, yeah, that's really what stands out to me is just like this contrast of, you're in a desert, not many things grow tall in the desert. Maybe if there's some water somewhere, you might have some trees along a riparian area, but here they are out kind of in the open, growing to such heights.
Yeah.
So you started to touch on these terms of the Victorian era writers. And I think the other thing that really comes to my mind of that era is like it's an era of colonization, and it's the era of we even had the Bureau of Reclamation. They wanted to reclaim a lot of these lands, and when they say reclaim, like turn it into agriculture, turn it into places where people can live. How did that feed into this narrative about the Joshua Tree?
I think it's constantly in the background. Yeah, there's no way to understand our relationship to Joshua Tree and Western lands without the background of manifest destiny, westward movement, reclamation. So, in confronting something alien, monstrous, we could throw out more terms. They called it demoniacal. They called it infernal. Yeah, literally sentences like grotesque monsters in pain compared to images from Poe, Edgar Allan Poe, Gustave Doré, just the most fantastical, wild imagery possible. People confronted this thing, I think there was a need. It's obviously large. It's an anomaly on the landscape, like you're describing. If suddenly there's this 60-foot tall biomass that you find hideous and you have very little resources, you're in a hostile environment. It's foreign to you. You're coming in a covered wagon with your grand piano and all your wedding dresses and all this crap that you're not going to need when you get to the shores of California. You're going to have to throw it all away. You're coming through it. You want to see, hey, what can we do with this thing? How can we make this of use to to psychologize it a little bit too. If you're suffering out there and you need water and you're out of hope, and there's this thing in kind of human outlines just looming over you, offering out absolutely no help other than, the Spanish called it Izote de Desierto, desert dagger. It's just reaching out with these sharp sword-like fronds that'll put your eye out. You might not have a lot of warm feelings towards the tree. So there was immediately a desire to make some use of it. And maybe it sounds crazy, but if you read the statements in this book, it sounds like there was almost a desire to punish it in some way. And people made fast use. They tried many, many means to wipe this thing out or put it to some, practical use. And none of them succeeded, which is so fun, in hindsight today. Maybe not for the people who tried, but yeah, we definitely sought to extract and transform that tree into something practical, and we have not succeeded yet.
Do you have any favorite failures that you learned about in researching this book?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest one was paper. For a time, the tree was even referred to as the paper tree. So many names were blowing around the Mojave Desert. I don't think it was guaranteed that Joshua Tree would win out at all. But there was actually a series of paper mills that were constructed at the edge of LA County. Capital funding came supposedly from as far away as London, and they set to work chopping these trees down. I found statements, referring to an army of Chinese coolies dragging these trees. The whole thing started with the chopping down of the largest tree known, kind of like a circus kind of atmosphere, I think, celebrating the fall of this tree. There's statements like fall the parched specters, the demoniacal specters of the plains.
That just seems so foreign. Like I know there are still in traditional logging, loggers often want to go for the old growth trees, but even then, like the biggest trees are still set aside often, even in those environments. I know not every time, but just thinking about this, like, let's take down the biggest one first. That really helps give a perspective as to how people were thinking about this at the time.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of love. Yeah, and it's an irony I point out in the book that I kind of love. It was boiling this tree, like technically the elasticity of the fibers was not suitable for paper. So they tried. And so this tree that would bend to absolutely no purpose was saved by, in this case, its elasticity in the boils. So yeah, that venture failed. Tons of money went into it. They cut down tons of trees. I think that's probably my favorite example. Another great one was supposedly the bark was shipped to the theater of World War I and was used as a splint. I guess it'll bend one way and not another. So it's pretty hideous to think of this tree that's been demonized as this just ghoulish, infernal monster. And then they're shipping, its skin off to World War I, where men are dying in mass in these trenches. And I shouldn't get too colorful here, but yeah, they used Joshua tree bark as a splint. And from what I could tell, because it couldn't be sterilized, I don't think it wasn't a great substance. People were just getting infected. It wasn't good for medical use. It's another crazy one.
And I neglected to ask, what is the origin of the name Joshua Tree? We talked about the Latin name, but not the common name.
Yeah, that is, I've learned a little bit. It's debated. So I think there's still more work to be done on that historically. But yeah, technically, Mormon pilgrims crossing the desert. The Mormons are kind of an outlier here. They've, I guess, kind of been an outlier throughout American history. But yeah, they're an outlier insofar as they are the only group, it seems, that seems to have had an optimistic interpretation of the Joshua Tree. They saw these trees as a symbol of potentially the coming promised land, so the story goes, and saw the tree with its arms lifted to heaven as a symbol of Joshua. And in the lore, I guess a little cloud scudded through the sky and stopped in just the right place as Joshua commanded, and brought them just enough shade at the right moment to help their pilgrimage along.
Wow.
So the story goes.
We're already, I think, the tide's turning a little bit in our discussion right now with a slightly more optimistic point of view from the Mormons. And you contrast that to today with the immense popularity of Joshua Tree National Park and Joshua trees in particular. What started to shift the tide in the public's eye towards these trees or towards these yuccas?
That's a good question. And as I've been discussing this with more and more people, the The people in the best position to know more than me, I don't think have a clear idea either. But I think it was 1960s, counterculture, the U2 album, the Joshua Tree. If we think to the 1960s, creative ferment, LSD, tons of musicians in LA making treks out to the desert. There's obviously Graham Parsons has a lot of Joshua Tree lore, but suddenly this place became kind of hip and a counterculture destination slowly, gradually. But the current popularity boom, I mean, like I start off saying at the start of Yuck 15 years ago, I mean, you'd go out there when I was younger and camping in Death Valley and throughout the Eastern Sierra, Alabama Hills, Joshua Tree. There's kind of nobody out there. Like the idea of making a reservation for a campsite kind of didn't exist. So even with U2 and whatever you want to say, I mean, like 15 years ago, these places were not like booming at all. There's been a single bar in the town of Joshua Tree until the past couple of years. You think of the millions of people going through there. There's just been, one place to get a drink. So I don't really have the answer. I think that's something that deserves more like cultural study. Like, why has this area become so popular?
Well, maybe the answer is there isn't an answer. It seems like there's a lot of step-by-step growing of, in the public consciousness, from the countercultural LSD binges out in the desert to the U2 album to realization these trees are threatened to, like step by step by step. Perhaps it's just that, but yeah, it seems like a ripe area for for another story, another book.
And it's a good thing. Yeah. I mean, I feel conflicted about it, but it is a good thing. I mean, you get out there, you see all this traffic, tons of people, if you could, people that live out there and people that remember when these places weren't so crowded can get a little frustrating. But again, I mean, I think it is positive that Americans have rediscovered their parks, and some of these places that were kind of seen as, hey, there's nothing to see there. I mean, you're super wrong to think that. There's Death Valley, a wasteland. It's one of the most epic, beautiful, astounding places you can stand in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think another big part of like now the immense popularity that we're seeing these days, a lot of people attribute it to social media and to Instagram. And you hinted a little bit at it with your, with the weddings that occur there. Again, do you have any insights into why did this unique place take such a viral hold on social media?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. That's why this is so fun to write about this topic. In some ways, is it feels mysterious. I mean, we've used the word weird, alien, unique, strange. It's a permanent photogenic backdrop. I mean, all these weird alien Dr. Seuss trees. There's endless music videos. Like I remember someone was playing some song like Tanache, like Nasty or something, some viral song from a summer ago. And I'm watching it. I'm like, dude, are you kidding? Like these little alien AI cams are shooting around this hot lady who's like dancing in the desert. And it's literally just like, what does this have to do with Joshua trees? Like there's just Joshua trees in the background. So I don't know what it is. It's become a symbol for millennials, Gen Z, as a necessary pilgrimage. There's something hip there. There's something sacred. I think authenticity is something that gets thrown around a lot. There's it's a symbol of some authentic desert quest. And social media, obviously, if you get a photo of yourself in front of a Joshua tree, your friends, if they don't know what it is, hey, that's really cool. I want to go there. And all the stylized photos, all the experiences shared on social media, it continues to snowball. It goes viral, it builds. But it is really mysterious. Like, why is this such a cool place to get a pic? Why are there so many commercials? I mean, this Johnny Depp Dior commercial, look at that thing. It is so weird. I don't know what it is. It's close to LA. There's that. So
yeah,
it wasn't an easy shooting location.
That's interesting, and as obvious as that is, I hadn't really thought about that before. Because to me, I live in Northern California. I occasionally go down to LA. It's not exactly convenient though to get to Joshua Tree, but if you live in LA and you're looking for new, unique things to do, it's easier to get there than it is to Death Valley or Vegas or, other places. So yeah, I could definitely see that.
Yeah.
Thinking about the national park, and that's something I want to stress. We talked about it a bit earlier. So there's Joshua Tree National Park close to LA. And that park has a lot more to offer than just the Joshua trees as well. So I think people come out there to look at the stars and to see the rock formations. And there's little oases with native palm trees. And lots of really cool things to see there. But that's not the only place that you can find amazing desert landscapes, amazing Joshua trees. There's like a preserve, a Mojave Preserve. Do you know the name of that one? Just
the Mojave National Preserve. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Probably.
So yeah, I mean, there's the Mojave National Preserve. You talked about Eastern Sierra stands. There's, like I mentioned, some in Arizona, maybe Utah, like you talked about. So yeah, you don't have to go to the national park. And maybe that's something that if people are looking to see Joshua trees, but they want to avoid the crowds, they can try some of these other areas and help, disperse these dense crowds a little bit,
Yeah, definitely.
So looking ahead a little bit, or a lot, I suppose, depending on your frame of reference, you highlight in the book some of the dire scientific predictions about the Joshua tree's future. It's definitely threatened by a number of different things. Can you tell me a little bit about what you found in your research for the future of Joshua trees?
Yeah, it's bleak reading. The most significant thorough studies that have come out have predicted the Joshua tree is basically likely to go extinct by the end of this century. And that's due to a warming world, so the scientists say. Warming planet, less rain, harder for this thing that's already barely hanging in there, it seems. You see thousands of them. It doesn't seem that way, but as we've been discussing, it's a long process to get a mature Joshua tree. So yeah, less rain, drier, less likely to flower, less flowers. Yucca moth is going to be struggling. Yucca moth struggles. Joshua tree cannot reproduce. Fire, I think, is going to probably be one of maybe the biggest deciders. We just had a fire in Joshua tree over the weekend. And you mentioned grasses, nitrogen in the atmosphere, invasive non-native grasses, provide tons of fuel where the Joshua tree didn't evolve with those kind of grasses. They're not supposed to be there. Now we have drier planet, a bunch of grass hanging between these stands of trees. Any spark, you're gonna have wildfire that burns the trees, and the trees did not evolve with fire, so they're not adapted. They don't make it at all. So the predictions are dire, and it's been thought. The news is bad. It's been thought that there's, we can isolate these refugia areas at higher elevations. People won't be as likely to go up there. It's going to be cooler. It's going to be a little wetter. But we've already seen these places that scientists were studying. It's like, okay, this is going to be a holdout. We're going to do everything we can to keep this area clean of grass. This is going to be sort of the stronghold where the species will survive. Even some of those places that have been identified have actually already burned. So yeah, I hate to say it, but yeah, it's not. Things are not looking great. Joshua tree, who has never helped us, needs our helping hand.
I think the story, when I first started learning about the Joshua tree, it was all about climate change and the warming temperatures. And kind of as the short story goes, the shortened story, with the warming climate, these trees would have to migrate to higher and higher elevations. But at some point you run out, like there's no higher elevation to go to, and they don't reproduce fast enough to keep up with the climate change. And now, yeah, I'd say just like so much of the West, in the last decade or so, the reality of wildfire fueled largely, there's so many reasons. It's climate change, but also these invasive species that now provide a fuel load that didn't exist historically. Yeah. So, one fire can just destroy an entire stand of these trees. And that's the thing that really, I think, concerns me the most, as you point out, because it's entirely new. You can't control it. And yeah, they're in trouble. Did you find hope? Did you find ways that creative people, scientists, community efforts, have come up with to help fend this off?
Yeah, well, maybe before we hop into that, I think it's important to note too that another piece of this puzzle too is just funding for the parks. It's been cut. If these parks and if we had more people working in conservation in and outside government, more could be done. So with more resources, more people on hand, I think we could improve the chances here. So it is worth noting that the defunding of parks and federal agencies is certainly not helping. We could find some hope if we could reverse that process. But in terms of hope, I think if I'd written this book today, I might not have ended the book on such a bleak note. The more I've been talking about it and processing it and looking back a little bit, if I do find some hope. I think it lies in the fact that the Joshua Tree has always frustrated human beings at every turn, and every time we've tried to, transform this thing into something practical for our use, it has let us down and frustrated our efforts. And while this isn't like a scientific claim, I think just continuing that logic, I'm somewhat hopeful that the Joshua Tree might frustrate the predictions of scientists. And not that anyone is hoping this thing will suffer or go extinct any longer. Quietly, irrationally, I'm hoping that our best scientists might find that their methods and predictions were once again wrong, and crazy, weird, grotesque Joshua endures. But science is not saying that.
Yeah, I guess riffing off of what you just said with this organism frustrating people over the decades, over the centuries, the thought that came to mind, again, kind of like brainstorming optimism here, is we have these separated populations, and people who study biology recognize that when populations are separated, they're kind of on a path of speciation almost, like their local pockets of DNA are drifting away from each other. So my hope is that maybe there's an isolated population somewhere that just through pure coincidence is more adaptable to these changing conditions and could potentially be a source of recolonizing, or if it comes to that, like, of course, we don't want it to get to a point where you have to recolonize. We'd prefer that all of these populations just sustain. So perhaps there's some, back to your point of funding research, funding the parks and so forth, maybe there's some evolutionary advantage out there because these populations are separated from each other and kind of drifting away from each other in a way. That's just me riffing. So who knows if any of that's true, but I hope it's true.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great thought. I think we need to, be optimistic and creative and resourceful and not simply throw up our arms and say that it's doomed, despite the very bleak headlines and conclusions of the scientists. The future is not guaranteed, and there's work to do for sure.
Yeah, I love that quote. The future is not guaranteed. I have to remind myself of that constantly. It's easy to get down these little rat holes and believe that everything is set. So, given everything you've learned, everything we've talked about today, do you have any other thoughts about Joshua trees, the history, the future? Anything that you really wanted to talk about that we didn't cover?
Well, I could mention one of my favorite parts in the book that I think is fun and bleak and hilarious and provides maybe one exception to what we've been saying. And it was kind of the one example in which the Joshua Tree maybe was able to provide some use to human beings. And that is inside the Puente Hills landfill, that, if you remember that part. So as Los Angeles has obviously been expanding horizontally across the Southern California landscape forever, in the outlands of Victorville, Lancaster, where the metropolis does occasionally hit Joshua trees. Many of those were bulldozed, 1980s, 1990s, early 2000s to make room for new McMansions out in these like bedroom communities, outskirts of LA. There is in kind of the center of Los Angeles, there's quietly hiding the largest landfill in the world. It's called Puente Hills. I think it's like 8 stories taller than City Hall in downtown Los Angeles. It's like a engineering marvel. It is like a man-made mountain, finally made the term landfill misnomer. It is this vast bulge that's hidden amongst other hills near Whittier. In researching this book, I had to conclude that this vast repository for the Southern California landscape for 60 years, there has to be within there a strata of Joshua trees buried and quietly decaying and providing power for 50,000 homes in Southern California, because the methane captured off of that vast landfill of Puente Hills is burned every day to supposedly power 50,000 homes in Los Angeles. So in that regard, the Joshua Tree has finally provided some use to us as we capture the toxic gas of its decay. Fun part of the book. But that was the only thing. That and T-shirts like you're wearing, Michael. The commodification of it as a symbol of what we do not quite know, and its putrefaction. Its practical uses there.
Yeah, I mean, it's telling that the sort of kind of fun story from the book is also a morbid one. I think it fits right along with the theme of this history of this tree, and unfortunately where we're going, or where we seem to be going. But as you said, the future is not guaranteed. Hopefully, with efforts like your own and the continually growing popularity of these places, we can turn the tide. We can take things in a different direction. Before we end for today, I'm curious. You seem to have a kind of a history of some interesting storytelling between China Lake and this book, and you have a Substack with some unique essays. So do you have any other upcoming projects you want to highlight? Are you going out touring with this book at the moment? Like anything you just want to promote about yourself and your work and Yuck in particular?
Yeah, I have an event coming up in Los Angeles, June 26th, I think, at the Philosophical Research Library. An event planned in San Diego for later in the summer. You can check my website for a date on that. And yeah, follow my Substack. Dumpster Fires is the name of that. I used to live in an apartment that had a dumpster fire in the alley every day. But yeah, my window on the world, Los Angeles, and the history of Southern California that I'm constantly researching. But the thing that I have been working towards for years right now is a book about a meltdown that happened in Los Angeles. There's actually a nuclear meltdown that happened at the end of the San Fernando Valley that not many people know about in 1959. And it's thought to have possibly released like 400 times the radiation of 3 Mile Island, which would make it by far the largest nuclear meltdown in United States history. And this was technically covered up by the federal government for 20 years, only exposed in 1979. And
oh, wow.
There's a lot to say about it, but yeah, continuing the kind of, just weird research that I do. Yeah, there's a book that I've been working on that just has a lot of crazy, kind of almost unbelievable history related to rocket research, nuclear research. There's also a Native American rock art site, a massive cave just beneath like a NASA rocket test stand up there. Saying too much about it, but yeah, a book about a nuclear meltdown in Los Angeles.
I'd never heard of it, so I'm now curious to
the
both
Santa
for the book.
Susana.
Okay,
Santa Susana Field Laboratory is what it's called. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's stay in touch. I'll keep an eye out for it, and when it comes out, I'll be sure to pass it along to the audience as well. Now, I already mentioned the Substack, so we'll be sure to link to that in the show notes. And you have a website as well that I'll link to. Any other places people can follow your work or follow you and your projects?
You can follow me on Instagram, constantly posting, reels related to some of this content and some of my other research. Yeah, so Instagram's a great place to see what I'm up to and what I'm writing as well.
Sounds great. And before we end this session for today, do you have anything else come to mind that you wanted to get off your chest before we hang up?
Ooh, check out my other book, China Lake. I would say that is, when I start talking about these research connections, I start to sound crazy. But yeah, that is a wild book about climate change, the Mojave Desert, with some really similar, like we were describing earlier, fascinating, jarring twists and turns throughout that book that, depending on your readerly temperament, you might really enjoy or be terribly confused by. But it's a fun book.
Yeah, those are the best books. All right. Well, thank you again so much for taking the time this morning and kind of accommodating my schedule. Usually I try to do the opposite, but I'm in a unique place here at the moment where I'm a little more pinched for time. So I really appreciate it. And I appreciate the work that you've done here and appreciate you. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Michael. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for sticking through the entire episode. If you made it this far, I hope that it means that you enjoyed it. If so, please spread the word and share this episode with 3 friends or groups that you think would enjoy it too. As for today's episode, let me know. Did I miss anything? Was there a topic I should have covered? Let me know at podcast@jumpstartnature.com or DM me on any of my social accounts. I'll do my best to answer your questions. You can find me at Nature's Archive, one word, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. I also share photography, nature stories, and much more on those accounts, so you can follow just to stay in touch too. And despite being called crazy by numerous friends and colleagues, last year I left my tech career behind to start Jumpstart Nature, which Nature's Archive is now part of. For the sake of myself, my family, and the planet, I need to make this work. So please also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/jumpstartnature. I offer some exclusive content and perks, and you can start donations as low as $4 a month. Lastly, please also check out our latest creation. It's the Jumpstart Nature podcast. Each episode reveals an unseen, surprising, or misunderstood nature topic with the help of experts and our host, Griff Griffith. It's entertaining and inspiring, and even reached number 3 on the Apple Nature podcast charts. There's much more on our roadmap, but we need your support, so check out jumpstartnature.com for more details. Thank you.